The Artist and the Eternal. Chapter 1. The Awakening. Olga lived in the modest suburbs of Paris, in a small apartment overlooking a quiet courtyard where morning light filtered through lace curtains her grandmother had made decades ago. The space was cramped but filled with life. Canvases leaned against every wall. Brushes stood in mason jars like colourful bouquets, and the scent of oil paint mingled with brewing coffee each morning. For 3 years she had maintained the same rhythm. 5 days a week, she worked at the small art supply store near République, helping tourists find the perfect watercolour sets and listening to local artists complain about the rising cost of quality brushes. But it was her weekends that truly belonged to her. Every Saturday, without fail, she would take the metro into the heart of Paris, walking the tourist-heavy areas around the Louvre, Notre Dame, and the Champs-Élysées. Most Parisians avoided these areas like the plague, but Olga found them intoxicating. The babel of languages, the wonder in children's eyes as they saw the city of light for the first time, the way lovers from every corner of the world seemed to find each other more beautiful against the backdrop of centuries-old stone, it all fed something deep in her soul. She would spend hours in cafe corners sketching the interactions between a Japanese couple trying to order pastries in broken French, or the way an elderly man from Morocco gazed up at the Eiffel Tower as if seeing it in a dream. These moments, these fleeting connections between people and place, became the foundation for her paintings. Her evenings were sacred. After simple dinners of bread, cheese, and whatever vegetables she could afford, Olga would spread her day's sketches across her kitchen table and let them speak to her. Sometimes a gesture captured in pencil would bloom into a full canvas of colour and movement. Other times, an overheard conversation in 3 languages would inspire an abstract piece that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the city itself. This particular Saturday in late October started like any other. The autumn air carried that crisp promise of winter, and the tourist had thinned enough that she could actually find her favourite spot, a small bench near the Louvre's glass pyramid, where she could observe the constant stream of humanity while remaining relatively unnoticed. She settled in with her coffee and mini sketchbook, the one she'd carried for so many weekends, that its leather cover had moulded to the shape of her palm. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and she began to draw almost unconsciously, the way a child's laughter echoed off ancient stones, the careful steps of an elderly woman photographing every architectural detail, the hurried stride of a businessman cutting through the tourist crowds. But something felt different today. There was an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the approaching storm clouds. It was as if the very stones beneath her feet were humming with some ancient frequency she'd never noticed before. At first, she attributed it to her imagination. Artists were prone to such fancies. But as the morning wore on, the feeling intensified. Her pen seemed to move of its own accord across the pages, drawing lines and shapes that felt important, though she couldn't understand why. Faces emerged that she hadn't consciously observed, architectural details that seemed both familiar and impossible. It was then that she noticed she kept glancing toward one particular entrance, not the main pyramid entrance where most tourists flowed like a river, but a smaller, older door tucked into an alcove that most people passed without seeing. Something about that doorway pulled at her attention like a magnet. That's when she saw him. He sat on the stone steps leading to that forgotten entrance, perfectly still in a way that made him seem like part of the architecture itself. While everyone around him moved with the restless energy of tourists and city dwellers, he possessed a stillness that was almost supernatural. His appearance struck her immediately. Where most Parisians dressed in carefully curated casual elegance, this man looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a historical drama. His hair was long and pale, braided with small metal ornaments that caught the light when he moved. His clothes, while clearly modern, had an old-world quality, a long coat that fell like a cloak, boots that looked handcrafted, and a bearing that spoke of different centuries. But it was his face that truly captured her. strong, angular features that could have been carved from the same stone as the Louvre itself. And his eyes, even from this distance, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. Because he was looking directly at her. Olga's hand stilled on her sketchbook. Had he been watching her this entire time? How had she not noticed? The logical part of her mind suggested she look away, return to her sketching, pretend she hadn't noticed his attention. But something deeper, more primal, kept her frozen in place. Their eyes met across the bustling courtyard, and the world seemed to shift on its axis. The sounds of traffic and conversation faded to a distant hum. The constant movement of people around them blurred into background noise. It was as if a bubble of silence and stillness had formed around just the two of them. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours. Olga found herself cataloguing every detail of his facet. The way the morning light highlighted the sharp line of his jaw, the small scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline, the intensity in his pale blue eyes that seemed to see not just her, but into her. Then he moved. Rising from the stone steps with fluid grace, he began walking toward her, not hurrying, not hesitating, but with the steady purpose of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Each step he took seemed to fold the distance between them, not just physically, but temporally, as if he were walking not just across the courtyard, but across years, decades, perhaps centuries. Olga's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, to pack her things, to disappear into the crowd. But she remained frozen, mesmerized by his approach, by the way he moved like a predator who had found exactly what he'd been hunting. When he was just a few feet away, close enough that she could see the intricate metalwork in the braids of his hair, close enough to catch the scent of pine and something else, something wild and indefinable, he spoke. "Hello, you beautiful." His voice was deep, accented in a way that wasn't quite Swedish, wasn't quite Norwegian, but something older, something that predated modern national boundaries. The words themselves were simple, but they carried weight, as if they held meanings beyond their surface. A spreading smile transformed his austere features, and Olga felt her breath catch. This wasn't the practiced charm of a man used to picking up women in tourist areas. This was something else entirely. Recognition, relief, and something that looked dangerously like devotion. "How come you are here?" he continued, his head tilting slightly as if her presence in this place, at this time, was the answer to a question he'd been asking for a very long time. The casual way he spoke, as if they were continuing a conversation rather than meeting for the first time, sent Olga's mind reeling. What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. It felt like being examined by someone who was trying to match her face to a memory, someone who was afraid she might be a mirage that would disappear if he blinked too hard. The sound was thoughtful, almost tender. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever spell hung between them, he lifted his hand toward her shoulder. The moment his skin made contact with hers, the world stopped. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally. The pigeons that had been pecking at crumbs near her feet froze mid-step. A child's laughter hung in the air like a crystal note that would never fade. Even the clouds overhead seemed painted in place, their shadows no longer moving across the ancient stones. Around them, a soft golden glow emanated from nowhere and everywhere, wrapping them in a cocoon of warmth and light. But more than that, Olga felt something she had no words for, a vibration that started where his hand touched her shoulder and radiated through her entire body. It was warmth and recognition and homecoming all at once. And strangest of all, it felt familiar. as if her soul remembered this feeling even though her mind insisted they had never met. Chapter 2. Echoes of Memory. "What's happening to us?" Olga whispered, though in the stillness that surrounded them, her voice seemed to carry like music. The man's expression softened, and for a moment he looked not like the intimidating figure who had approached her, but like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long, and was finally allowed to set it down. "You don't remember," he said, and it wasn't a question. His hand remained on her shoulder, and through that contact, Olga could feel something passing between them. Not quite thought, not quite emotion, but something deeper. "Of course you don't." "It's different every time." "Every time?" The words felt foreign in her mouth. "I don't understand." "We've never met before. I would remember." "Would you?" His thumb traced a small circle on her shoulder, and with that simple touch, images began to flash behind Olga's closed eyelids. A woman who looked like her, but wasn't her, standing in a field of grain under a sky that burned with aurora. The same woman, older, weaving by firelight while snow piled against a wooden door. The same woman again, younger, laughing as she danced around a bonfire, while figures in furs and leather clapped and sang. "Stop!" Olga gasped, stepping back from his touch. The moment the contact broke, the world lurched back into motion. The child's laughter resumed, the pigeons continued their eternal quest for crumbs, and the golden glow faded like morning mist. But the images remained, hovering at the edge of her consciousness like half-remembered dreams. The man watched her with patient eyes, making no move to pursue her as she put distance between them. "My name is Eric," he said simply, "and I have been looking for you for a very long time." "Looking for me?" Olga clutched her sketchbook to her chest, like a shield. "You don't even know my name?" "Olga." The way he said it made her freeze. Not the French pronunciation she was used to, Olga, with the emphasis on the second syllable, but something older, more northern. "Oh, Olga," like a prayer, like a word that held power. "Your name is Olga, and you are an artist. You see things others cannot see, feel connections others cannot feel. You are drawn to places where many cultures meet because your soul remembers when the world was smaller, when all peoples were neighbours." Each word hit her like a physically, not because they were wrong, but because they were impossibly, terrifyingly right. How could this stranger know things about her that she had never shared with anyone? How could he know about the way she felt in crowds, the way certain places seemed to sing to her, the way her art flowed best when she was surrounded by the babel of different languages? "You're scaring me," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Frightened, yes, but also fascinated. And underneath both fear and fascination was something else, a pull she couldn't name, couldn't resist. Eric's expression grew pained. "I don't want to frighten you. I want to explain, but explanations require time, and time." He looked around the busy courtyard, at the tourists snapping photos, and the street performers setting up for their afternoon shows. "Time is complicated." "Then make it simple," Olga said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Tell me who you are, and what you want with me." For a long moment, Eric was silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years, not just his own years, but centuries of them. "I am what your people might call immortal, though that word doesn't capture the truth of it. I was born in what you now call Norway, in a time when the world was young and magic flowed as freely as rivers. I was a warrior, a wanderer, a seeker of knowledge and adventure. And in one particular life, in one particular time, I loved a woman who died before her time." Olga's mouth went dry. "And you think I'm... what? Her reincarnation?" "Not her," Eric said, shaking his head. You, always you. She was you in that life, just as you have been you in dozens of others. Different names, different faces, different circumstances, but always the same soul. Always the same connection between us. That's impossible. Is it? Eric gestured to her sketchbook. Show me what you drew this morning. Despite every rational thought screaming at her not to engage with this madness, Olga found herself opening the sketchbook. The pages she had filled while sitting on this bench, the drawings she had made without conscious thought, stared back at her with impossible clarity. They were all of him. Page after page of Eric's face, drawn from angles she had never seen, in clothes she had never observed him wearing. Eric with longer hair and old armour. Eric standing on a longship's prow with wind whipping his braids. Eric kneeling beside a fire while snow fell around him. Eric holding a woman's hand, a woman whose face Olga couldn't quite make out, but whose eyes looked disturbingly familiar. How? Olga's voice failed her. Your soul remembers, even when your mind does not, Eric said gently. You've been drawing me in every life. Usually it takes longer for you to find me, sometimes decades. But this time... He smiled and the expression transformed his entire face. This time you found me almost immediately. As if you were ready. Ready for what? To remember. To choose. The words hung between them like a challenge. Around them, the ordinary world continued its dance. Tourists consulting maps, couples taking selfies, children chasing pigeons. But Olga felt as if she stood at the edge of a precipice, with ordinary life on one side and something vast and unknown on the other. I think I need coffee, she said finally. Something stronger than coffee. Eric's laughter was warm and familiar, and hearing it made something tight in Olga's chest loosen. There's a cafe nearby. Somewhere quiet where we can talk properly. And if I come with you, you'll explain everything. I'll try, Eric said. Though some things are easier to show than to tell how every instinct that told her to run, to call the police, to retreat to the safety of her ordinary life, Olga nodded. All right. But just coffee, and talking, and you keep your hands to yourself. Of course. Eric's expression grew solemn. The last thing I want is to force this on you. You must choose freely, as you always have. As they walked away from the Louvre, weaving through crowds of tourists and street vendors, Olga couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking not just to a cafe, but toward a future that would irrevocably change everything she thought she knew about herself. And the most terrifying part was that some deep, hidden part of her was eager for that change. Chapter 3. The Cafe of Truth. The cafe Eric led her to was tucked away on a narrow side street, the kind of place that existed in the gaps between tourist maps. Le temps perdu, according to the faded sign above the door, lost time. How appropriate, Olga thought with dark humour. Inside, the space was exactly what she needed. Dim lighting, mismatched furniture, and the kind of atmosphere that suggested the proprietors cared more about creating a sanctuary than maximising profits. Eric guided her to a corner table far from the few other patrons, and within moments, an elderly woman appeared with coffee and pastries they hadn't ordered. Merci, Madame Dubois, Eric said, and the woman nodded at him with the familiarity of long acquaintance. She knows you, Olga observed. I've been coming here for 40 years, Eric said simply. It was her grandmother's cafe before it was hers. 40 years? Olga wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, using the warmth to anchor herself. You don't look older than 30. That's part of what I need to explain. Eric settled back in his chair, and in the cafe's gentle lighting, Olga could see details she had missed in the harsh autumn sun. His eyes weren't just blue. They were the deep blue-grey of ocean storms, and they held a depth that spoke of experiences beyond normal human reckoning. I stopped aging at 28. That was approximately 1100 years ago. Olga nearly choked on her coffee. 1100! I know how it sounds. If someone had told me such a story when I was young and mortal, I would have laughed in their face. Eric's fingers drummed against the table, a nervous gesture that somehow made him seem more human. But magic was real then, more real than it is now. The world was younger, the barriers between realms thinner. What your people call mythology, we simply called life. Let's say I believe you, Olga said carefully. Why are you immortal? What made you special? Eric's expression grew distant. Love, he said simply. And loss. And a choice I made in grief that bound me to consequences I didn't understand. He was quiet for so long that Olga began to think he wouldn't continue. When he spoke again, his voice carried the cadence of someone recounting a story told many times, but never without pain. Her name, in that first life, was Astrid. We met when we were both young. I was barely 20, she was 18. I was a warrior in training, she was a skald, a storyteller. We fell in love the way young people do, completely and without reservation. Eric's smile was soft, but edged with sorrow. We planned to marry after my first successful raid, to build a life together, to have children who would carry our stories into the future. What happened? Winter fever. It swept through our settlement, and the sick either recovered quickly or... Eric's hands clenched. She fought for 3 days. I sat by her side, helpless, watching the light fade from her eyes. When she died, I was broken, mad with grief. Olga felt her throat tighten. Even without remembering, without fully believing, she could feel the echo of that ancient loss. There was a woman in our village, Eric continued. Old, wise, rumoured to have knowledge of the old ways. In my grief, I sought her out. I begged her to bring Astrid back, to undo what the fever had done. She told me that wasn't possible here. The dead cannot be returned. But she offered me something else. What? She said that souls sometimes find each other across lifetimes, that love strong enough could create connections that transcend death. She offered me a choice. I could join Astrid in death, or I could wait for her soul to return to the world. But if I chose to wait, I would be bound to that choice until she was ready to remember and love me again. Olga set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. And you chose to wait. I was young and desperate and couldn't imagine a world without her. So yes, I chose to wait. Eric's laugh was bitter. I thought it would be a few years, perhaps a decade. I didn't understand that the magic would make me immortal, that I would have to watch centuries pass while searching for glimpses of her soul in new faces, new lives. How many times? Olga whispered. You've been born 17 times since then, each time different. Different names, different places, different circumstances, but always an artist of some kind, always drawn to places where cultures meet. Always. He looked at her with such tenderness that her breath caught. Always beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your appearance. And each time you found me? Eventually. Sometimes it took decades. Once it took over a century. You were born in a remote village in the mountains of Tibet, and by the time I reached you, you were already old and dying. Eric's voice grew rough. That was difficult. What happens when you find me? Do I always remember? Sometimes. Not always immediately, and not always completely. But the connection is always there. We have had lives together, Olga. Beautiful lives. You've been my wife, my partner, my greatest love. We've built homes together, travelled the world together, created art and music and stories together. But, Eric's expression grew pained. But you're mortal, and I'm not. Eventually, age takes you, or illness, or accident, and I'm left alone again, waiting for your soul to find its way back to the world. The cafe seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the universe itself were listening to this confession of impossible love. Olga stared into her coffee, trying to process what she was hearing. "Why don't I remember?" she asked finally. "The soul carries impressions, not memories. You remember me in dreams, in art, in the way certain places feel familiar. But the specific details of past lives, those fade when a soul takes on a new form." "Show me," Olga said suddenly. "What?" "Earlier, when you touched me, I saw things, glimpses. If what you're saying is true, if we've really lived these lives together, show me more." Eric hesitated. "That kind of connection, it's intense. And once you see, once you truly remember, there's no going back to not knowing." "I already can't go back," Olga said, with a certainty that surprised her. "The moment you walked toward me at the Louvre, something changed. I can feel it, this pull, this recognition. I need to understand what it means." For a long moment, Eric studied her face. Then, slowly, he extended his hand across the table, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Olga looked at his hand, long fingers, calloused palms, a thin white scar across his knuckles. It looked like a hand that had held weapons and tools, that had built things and protected things. It looked like a hand that had held her. Taking a deep breath, she placed her palm against his. The world dissolved. Chapter 4. Visions of Us. She is Marguerite, daughter of a baker in medieval Toulouse. She paints in secret, hiding her work from a father who believes art is frivolous for women. Eric finds her selling her paintings at the market square, disguised as a young man. Their eyes meet across a crowd of merchants and customers, and the recognition is instant. He helps her maintain her disguise, becomes her patron, and eventually her lover. They have 3 beautiful years before the plague takes her. She is Chen Wei, a court artist in the Ming dynasty. Eric arrives in China as part of a diplomatic envoy, having learned over the centuries to adapt, to blend into whatever culture he finds himself in. She teaches him to paint with ink and water. He tells her stories of the northern lands that feel like memories to her. They create art together until political upheaval forces her to flee the capital. She dies in his arms as their boat capsizes in a storm. She is Esperanza, a painter in colonial Mexico. Eric finds her creating murals in secret, hidden messages of hope and resistance embedded in religious imagery. They work together to help indigenous people preserve their stories in art. She is executed for sedition. He arrives too late to save her. She is Isabella, a Venetian glass artist in the Renaissance. Their love affair is passionate and public, scandalizing the city. She creates windows for churches that capture light like liquid rainbow. Eric learns to work glass under her tutelage. She dies of a fever while he is away, buying supplies for their workshop. Life after life, love after love, loss after loss. Olga jerked her hand back, gasping. The cafe rushed back into focus, too bright and too real after the vivid intensity of those shared memories. "Too much," Eric said immediately, reaching for her but stopping himself. "I'm sorry, I should have warned you." "No," Olga said, pressing her hands to her eyes. "No, I needed to see. It's just quote." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she truly saw him, not as a stranger who had approached her at the Louvre, but as the constant thread that had run through dozens of lifetimes. "It's you. It's always been you." "Yes, and I always die was..." "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "And you always survive." "Yes." Olga leaned back in her chair, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just experienced. Centuries of love, of loss, of connection, that transcended death itself. And always, always, Eric left behind to grieve and wait and search. That's the choice the wise woman offered you, she said suddenly. Wait for me to be ready to remember and love you again. What happens when I'm ready? Eric went very still. I don't know. You don't know? The magic that binds me, it was created in grief and desperation. The old woman who cast it, she spoke in riddles, as they all did. She said I would be free to choose when you were ready to choose. But what that means exactly? Eric shrugged helplessly. I've never been brave enough to find out. What choices? I assume I could choose to become mortal again, to age and die naturally. Or perhaps to remain immortal, but break the connection that draws us together. Eric's voice grew rough. Or perhaps something else entirely. The magic of those old days was unpredictable. Olga stared at him, pieces clicking into place. You're afraid. Terrified, Eric admitted. What if choosing mortality means we have only one more lifetime together? What if choosing to remain immortal means you stop being reborn? What if there are other consequences I can't foresee? At least now I know that loss is temporary. If I lose you permanently. You'd rather have me die again and again than risk losing me forever. I know how that sounds. I know it's selfish. But Olga, I have loved you for over 1,000 years. The thought of existing in a world where your soul no longer exists? Eric's hands clenched on the table. I'm not strong enough for that possibility. Olga reached across the table and covered his hands with hers. This time, the contact didn't bring visions, just warmth and the steady certainty of connection. What if I told you I was ready? She asked quietly. Eric's eyes snapped to hers. What? I can feel it, Eric. Sitting here, listening to you, seeing those memories. I can feel my soul recognizing you. Not just the romantic love, but the deep friendship, the partnership, the way we've been each other's constants across centuries. I'm tired of not remembering. I'm tired of you having to find me over and over again. I want to know what comes next. Olga, I'm not saying I want to rush into anything, she continued. I'm still processing all of this. But I can feel something shifting inside me. Some kind of readiness that wasn't there this morning. What if that's what the magic was waiting for? Not just for me to remember our past, but to be ready to choose our future. Eric stared at her for a long moment, hope and terror warring in his expression. And if the choice means risking everything? Then we risk everything together, Olga said. Because Eric, if what I'm feeling right now is even a fraction of what we've shared across all those lifetimes, then some risks are worth taking. For the first time since he had approached her at the Louvre, Eric smiled without shadows. It was the smile of a man who had been carrying the weight of centuries and was finally ready to set it down. There's something I need to show you, he said. Somewhere we need to go. If you're truly ready to remember, to choose, there's a place where the old magic still runs strong, where answers might finally be possible. Where? Norway, Eric said, the place where this all began. Chapter 5. Journey to the Past. 3 days later, Olga found herself on a plane to Oslo, her entire life packed into 2 suitcases, and a growing sense that she was stepping off the edge of the known world. She had called in sick to work, sublet her apartment to a friend, and withdrawn most of her savings. All decisions that would have seemed insane a week ago, but now felt like the most natural things in the world. Her boss at the art supply store had been surprisingly understanding. You have that look, Madame Laurent had said, studying Olga with sharp eyes. The look of someone who has found their destiny. Go, chérie. Some opportunities come only once in a lifetime. If only she knew, Olga had thought. The flight was turbulent, autumn storms making the small plane buck and shudder as they approached Norwegian airspace. Eric sat beside her, perfectly calm, occasionally pointing out landmarks below, when the clouds cleared enough to reveal the dramatic landscape. "There," he said, as they began their descent. "The Lofoten Islands. We lived there together once, in your life as Sigrid. You were a weaver, and you created tapestries that told the stories of the gods. I was a fisherman then, trying to live a simple life." Eric's voice carried a note of old sadness. "It lasted only 5 years before raiders burned the village." Olga pressed her face to the small window, studying the dramatic peaks that rose directly from the sea. Something about the landscape tugged at her, a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with nationality and everything to do with soul-deep memory. "How far are we going?" she asked. "North. To a place that doesn't appear on any map, where the old ways are still strong." Eric's hand found hers, and she was grateful that the contact no longer brought overwhelming visions. Instead, it brought comfort, steadiness, the feeling of being anchored to something solid in a world that had become fluid and strange. "It's going to be cold and remote and possibly dangerous. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Olga thought about her quiet life in Paris, her small apartment, her routine of work and weekend sketching. A week ago, that life had seemed sufficient, even satisfying. Now it felt like a shadow of real living. "I'm sure," she said. They landed in Oslo as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to set the fjords on fire. Eric had arranged for a car, something rugged and practical that could handle mountain roads and uncertain weather. As they drove north through a landscape that grew increasingly wild and empty, Eric told her more about the place they were heading. "It's called Vegvisir," he said. "Way shower. It was a sacred site long before I was born, a place where the barriers between worlds are thin. The old woman who bound me with this curse, blessing, whatever it is, she lived there. Her descendants still do." "Descendants? You mean there are others who know about magic, about what happened to you?" "A few. The knowledge has been passed down, though most of the old powers are sleeping now. The world changed, became less hospitable to magic. But Vegvisir remains." They drove through the nights, stopping only for gas and coffee, as the landscape around them grew ever more dramatic and remote. Mountains rose like ancient gods, and the aurora began to dance across the sky in green and blue curtains that made Olga's artist's soul ache with their beauty. "I want to paint this," she murmured, watching the lights shimmer and shift. "You have," Eric said softly. "Many times. In fact, it was your painting of the aurora, in your life as Astrid, that first made me fall in love with you. You captured something in the lights that I had never seen before, not just their beauty, but their soul." By dawn, they had left paved roads behind and were following what could generously be called a track through wilderness that felt untouched by modern life. The sun rose late this far north, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. And then, as they crested a ridge, Olga saw it. Vegvisir wasn't a town or even a village. It was a collection of ancient stone buildings clustered around what looked like a natural amphitheatre carved into the mountainside. Standing stones marked the perimeter of the site, and even from a distance, Olga could feel the power that radiated from the plus, a humming in her bones, a resonance in her soul. "It's real," she whispered. "Did you doubt it?" "Part of me, yes. Even after everything you showed me, part of me thought this might all be an elaborate delusion." Olga gripped the door handle as the car bounced over the rough track. "But I can feel it. Whatever magic exists here, it's real." Eric parked the car at the edge of the settlement, and as they climbed out, a figure emerged from the largest of the stone buildings. An elderly woman, bent with age but moving with surprising agility, approached them with a smile that spoke of long familiarity. "Eric Bjornsson," she said in accented English, though she looked at Olga as she spoke. You've brought her home at last. Gunhild, Eric replied, and Olga could hear relief in his voice. This is Olga. She's beginning to remember. The old woman, Gunhild, stepped closer to Olga, studying her with eyes that were sharp despite their clouded blue. Yes, I can see it in her. The awakening has begun. She reached out and touched Olga's forehead with one gnarled finger, and immediately Olga felt a jolt of recognition. An ancient face, younger but unmistakably the same, leaning over her as she lay dying. Don't be afraid, child. Love like yours doesn't end with death. Olga gasped, and Gunhild smiled. I am the great-great-granddaughter of the woman who bound Eric to his long waiting. Her knowledge lives in me, as does her obligation to help when the time of choosing finally arrives. The time of choosing? Come, Gunhild said, turning back toward the settlement. There is much to explain, and the magic is strongest at sunset. If you are truly ready to break the cycle, we must prepare. As they followed the old woman deeper into Vegvisir, Olga felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a cloak. Whatever happened in this remote place, whatever choices were offered, she knew that by tomorrow, her life, perhaps all her lives, would be irrevocably changed. The only question was whether she and Eric would face that change together, or whether the magic that had bound them for 1,000 years would finally tear them apart. Chapter 6. The Choice of Forever. The stone building Gunhild led them to was ancient beyond measure, its walls covered with runes and symbols that seemed to shift and dance in Olga's peripheral vision. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from the outside, with a central fire pit around which elaborate patterns had been carved into the floor. Sit, Gunhild instructed, gesturing to carved stone benches arranged around the fire. There are things you must understand before the sun sets. As they settled themselves, the old woman began to prepare something. Herbs and oils and other substances Olga couldn't identify, all combined with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The magic that binds you, Gunhild said without preamble, was born from desperation and shaped by love. But like all magic, it has rules, limitations, and consequences that were not fully understood when it was first cast. Your ancestor told me I would be free to choose when Olga was ready, Eric said. But she never explained what that meant. Because she didn't know, Gunhild replied bluntly. The magic was untested, experimental. She could see possible futures, but not definite ones. The old woman paused in her preparations to look directly at them. Over the centuries, as each of Olga's incarnations grew and died, the magic evolved, learned, adapted. Now finally, it has reached a point of resolution. What kind of resolution? Olga asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Gunhild's expression grew solemn. 3 choices will be offered. Each carries its own costs and rewards, but once chosen, there is no going back. She returned to her preparations, and the scents rising from her work began to fill the space. Pine and smoke, copper and salt, and something else that reminded Olga of storms and starlight. The first choice, Gunhild continued, is to break the binding entirely. Eric becomes mortal again, aging as he should have over the past 1,000 years. His death would be swift but peaceful. Your souls would be free to find each other naturally in future lives, or not at all. Olga's breath caught. He'd die? Not immediately, but soon. The weight of 11 centuries would settle on him all at once. Gunhild's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. It would be like falling asleep after a long, long day. Eric was quiet, but Olga could see him considering this option with the careful attention of someone who had imagined his own mortality many times over the centuries. The second choice, Gunhild continued, is to maintain the binding but change its nature. Instead of Olga being reborn into new lives, both of your souls would be returned to their original forms, Astrid and young Eric, as you were when you first loved each other. You would live that life again, for a natural span, and when death claimed you both, your souls would move on to whatever comes after. We'd forget everything that came between, Olga asked. All the lives we've shared, all the love we've built. Your souls would remember, but your minds would be those of the young people you once were. It would be, in many ways, like starting over. The third option seemed to hang in the air, unspoken but heavy with possibility. And the third choice, Eric prompted. Gunhild's ancient eyes glittered in the firelight. The third choice is the most dangerous and the most radical. Instead of breaking the binding or returning to the past, you would step forward into something entirely new. Eric's immortality would be shared with Olga. You would both become something between mortal and eternal, long-lived but not deathless, bound to each other, but free to choose the shape of your existence. Olga felt her heart race. What does that mean exactly? You would live for centuries, not millennia. You would age slowly, perhaps 1 year for every 10 that pass. You would be stronger than mortals, more resilient, but not invulnerable. And most importantly, you would face that long life together. What's the catch? Eric asked, and Olga was struck by how well he knew the nature of magical bargains. The transformation would be intense, Gunhild said, carefully. Your souls would be remade, rewoven at the most fundamental level. The process might destroy you both, or drive you mad, or change you into something unrecognizable. And if you chose this path, you could never return to purely human existence. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and Olga found herself staring into the flames as if they might hold answers. 3 choices, each with its own terrible beauty. How long do we have to decide? She asked. Until sunset. The magic is bound to cycles, the turning of seasons, the movement of celestial bodies. Tonight, when the sun touches the horizon, the binding will open itself to change. If no choice is made, it will close again, and you'll return to the cycle of death and rebirth for another 100 years before the opportunity comes again. Eric turned to Olga, his expression serious but not afraid. What are you thinking? Olga took a shaky breath. I'm thinking that a week ago I was a shop girl who sketched tourists on weekends, and now I'm being asked to choose the fate of my immortal soul. You don't have to choose anything, Eric said quietly. We could leave now, return to Paris, live whatever lifetime you have as normally as possible. The binding doesn't require you to choose. But then in 60 or 70 years, I'd die, and you'd be alone again, waiting for me to be reborn. And I'd lose all memory of this, of you, of what we've discovered together. Olga shook her head. That feels like giving up, like wasting this opportunity. And the other options? Olga considered each choice, trying to imagine the reality behind Gunhild's careful words. Eric dying peacefully but permanently, returning to be young Astrid and young Eric, losing centuries of shared experience, or taking the terrifying leap into unknown transformation. I know what I want, she said finally, but I need to know what you want. Eric was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of loneliness and love. I want to stop saying goodbye to you, he said simply. I want to build a life with you that doesn't end with me holding your hand as you slip away from me. I want to grow old with you, even if it takes centuries. I want to see what kind of art you create when you have time to truly master your craft. I want to travel the world with you, not to search for you, but to explore it together. Even if the transformation destroys us? Even then. Because, Olga, I have watched you die 17 times. I have been alone for longer than most civilizations have existed. The thought of centuries with you, even dangerous centuries, is worth any risk. Tears ran down Olga's cheeks, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was crying. relief, perhaps, or joy, or simple overwhelm at the magnitude of love being offered to her. "Then I choose the third option," she said. "I choose the transformation. I choose forever with you, whatever that looks like." Eric's smile was radiant. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified," Olga admitted. "But yes, I'm sure." Gunhild, who had been quietly tending her preparations during their conversation, looked up with satisfaction. "Then we begin. Remove your outer clothing and step into the circle. The transformation works best with skin contact to the ancient stones." As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Olga and Eric stripped to their undergarments and stepped into the carved circle around the fire pit. The stone beneath their feet was warm despite the cold air, heated by sources deeper than flame. Gunhild began to chant in a language older than Norse, older perhaps than any language still spoken. The symbols carved into the floor began to glow with soft light, and the air itself seemed to thicken with power. "Join hands," Gunhild instructed. "And whatever happens, do not let go. Your souls are about to be remade, and you must anchor each other through the process." Olga grasped Eric's hands tightly, feeling the familiar spark of connection intensify as the magic built around them. The carved symbols grew brighter, and she began to feel a tingling in her skin, a sense of something fundamental shifting inside her. "I love you," Eric said, his voice barely audible over the rising hum of magical energy. "I love you too," Olga replied, "in this life and all the ones that came before." The sun touched the horizon, and the world exploded into light. Epilogue, New Beginnings. 50 years later. Olga set down her brush and stepped back from the canvas, wiping paint-stained fingers on the smock that had become her uniform over the decades of their new life together. The painting before her captured the aurora as seen from their home in northern Norway, not the dramatic, tourist-friendly displays visible from the cities, but the subtle, intimate dance of light that happened on quiet nights when the sky felt close enough to touch. "It's beautiful," Eric said, from behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. At nearly 80 years old by the calendar, he looked perhaps 40, with silver beginning to thread through his hair and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of happiness. Olga leaned back against his chest, marveling as she still did sometimes at the simple miracle of his presence. No longer was she afraid that each day might be their last together. No longer did he wake in terror that she might have died in her sleep. They had time, not endless time, but enough. Centuries of it, to love and create and explore and simply be together. "The gallery in Oslo wants 12 pieces for the exhibition," she said. "I think this might be the last one." The exhibition of the mysterious couple who paint like old masters, but look like they're barely middle-aged? Eric teased. "I'm sure that won't cause any speculation at all." They had learned to be careful about their public presence, moving every few decades, maintaining just enough distance from normal society to avoid uncomfortable questions. But Olga's art had brought them fame anyway. Her paintings of the northern landscapes, infused with centuries of memory and emotion, were unlike anything contemporary artists produced. "At least you don't have to worry about someone recognizing you from your Viking days," Olga said. "I still can't believe you convinced the museum curator that your knowledge of medieval techniques came from extensive historical research." "Technically it did," Eric replied, spinning her around to face him. "I researched it by living through it." Even after 50 years of their transformed existence, Olga still felt her breath catch when he smiled at her like that. The transformation had changed them both. They were stronger, more resilient, attuned to each other in ways that went beyond normal human connection. But they were still recognizably themselves, still capable of surprise and growth and change. "What are you thinking about?" Eric asked, recognizing the contemplative expression that meant her artist's mind was working. Time, Olga said. How we have so much of it now, but it still feels precious. How we've lived together for 50 years, but it feels like we're still just beginning. We are still beginning, Eric said, seriously. Every day with you feels like a new start, even after 1,100 years of longing for you, 50 years of having you. It's not enough. It's never enough. Good, Olga said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Because we have approximately 800 more years to figure out what enough looks like. Outside their window, the aurora began its nightly dance, and somewhere in the village below, a young couple was likely falling in love for the first time, believing, as all young lovers do, that their passion was unique in all the world. Olga and Eric knew better. They knew that love could span lifetimes, survive transformations, grow stronger instead of weaker, when given time to deepen. They also knew, now, that forever was not a burden, but a gift. Eric pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her from behind as they stepped onto their balcony. Olga melted back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine, a sound that had comforted her through 50 years of nights like this, and would comfort her through centuries more to come. The aurora began its dance above them, painting the sky in ethereal greens and golds, but Olga found herself more captivated by the way Eric's breath warmed her ear, the way his fingers traced gentle patterns on her arms. Even after all these years, his touch still sent electricity through her veins. "Do you remember?" he murmured against her temple, his voice low and intimate. "That first night in Norway, when you were so afraid the transformation would change who we were to each other." Olga turned in his arms, her hands sliding up to cup his face, thumbs tracing the beloved contours of his cheekbones. "I remember being terrified we'd lose this," she whispered, rising on her toes until their foreheads touched. "This connection, this fire between us." "And instead, it only grew stronger," Eric said, his hands settling on her waist, drawing her impossibly closer until there was no space left between them. Their bodies fit together as perfectly now as they had on that first transformed night, two souls learning to inhabit new forms, discovering that love could deepen even when given infinite time to do so. Olga's fingers threaded through his silver-touched hair as his lips found the sensitive spot just below her ear that never failed to make her shiver. "I love that we still feel like teenagers when we touch," she breathed. "After 5 decades, after all those lifetimes, you still make my heart race." Eric's answer was to capture her mouth with his, a kiss that spoke of endless devotion, of promises kept across impossible odds, of desire that had survived death itself and emerged stronger. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, faces flushed with more than just the cold mountain air. "Come inside," Eric whispered against her lips, his voice rough with want. "Let me show you exactly how much I love that we have forever." Olga's smile was radiant as she let him guide her back through the doors, the aurora forgotten as they lost themselves in each other once more. Outside, the lights continued their cosmic dance, but inside their home, two immortal souls created their own magic, skin against skin, heart against heart, love flowing between them like light between the stars. Their story continued, no longer haunted by endings, but illuminated by the endless possibility of new beginnings, written in whispered endearments and tender caresses that would echo through all their centuries to come. The end.